Welcome to Opportunity Knocks. I'm your host, RevRaa, and again, as usual, I have my new co-host, Miss Mary V. And today we are going to be having a discussion as an organizers roundtable. We're going to be talking about faith-based organizing, organizing in academia, organizing in the streets, and then how all of those things tie in together. Today we got some additional folks at the table. A couple have been on the podcast before. If you can, introduce yourselves.
What's good, everybody? My name is Jason Martinez, also a core team member here at Chica.
My name is Asher Jones. I'm a volunteer here at Chica.
And I'm Mary. I'm over here at Chica, the co-founder and the lead for Village and Child Co-op. Also, we're in a building called the 909 Space, so you can look us up on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and follow us at Chica, CHICCCAA, or the 909 Space.
Cool. Welcome, everybody. So let's get this started by talking about what's coming up this weekend. For those of you that follow us, you may see that we are posting about an upcoming event, which is our solstice event. But we want to talk a little bit about how we got there. For those of you that know about, just different faith-based organizations and the time of year that it is, we are in the holiday season, so different faith-based groups are celebrating. So we've already had Hanukkah happen. We've had Chalaka for the UUs. We've had Christmas that's coming up, actually within a couple days. But one holiday that many times people forget or we don't hear too much about in mainstream is solstice or Yule. For folks that are indigenous, they may consider it solstice. For folks that are normally pagan or just generally earth-centered or earth-focused, we may call it Yule as well. It's just a time of acknowledging where we are at in our year. It's a time of giving thanks, not like Thanksgiving. Time for us to really reflect. When we look at the solstice and Yule, it was normally a time years ago where folks would be in the midwinter with their families. They'd be bundled up. It would be a time for storytelling, a time for realizing that the sun is going to return after being in the dark. The solstice was a time of great celebration. So for us here at Chica, and with talking about organizing, we've been putting together this event for community where we're able to celebrate our different traditions with one another and really build on what community looks like here in the IE. Would either of y'all like to talk about the solstice a little bit before?
Yeah, the thing that I just kind of want to highlight about the solstice is there's sometimes a very stereotyped view of the solstice as it relates to indigenous people, assuming that all tribes and all tribal people celebrated the solstice the same, and that is not true. Some indigenous peoples had huge celebrations for the solstice. Some just acknowledged it in very simple ways or very local, like just within their home or their family, and not like a huge gathering. So it varies from tribe to tribe, indigenous people to indigenous people. And so I think it's important to understand that lots of different indigenous communities around the world recognize it and note it and have science related to it and practices and ceremony related to it. But not all indigenous people around the world had huge gatherings at the solstice. So I just kind of want to point that out because we're a community where we have lots of people from different indigenous backgrounds, not just Native American, not just, indigenous people from what is known as Mexico or Central America, but all over the world. And so the solstice looked different all over the world. But the thing we see in common is that many people recognize that this was the time of year where the days were the shortest, and it was a time to offer gratitude for everything that had happened throughout the year, to reflect on what had happened through the year, to look at the past, and then also look to the future about what was going to be coming up in the new year. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there.
I think, too, there's also a piece of it where Winter Solstice being so close to New Year's Eve, everybody's gets ready to make a New Year's resolution. I'm going to start working out. I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to do better in school, yada, yada, yada. And it's always, like goals that we have in mind. They're good goals, but I think in looking at winter solstice as a whole and how that relates to the New Year's is that part of it is the reflection piece. Part of it is letting go. And I think a lot of us forget that in making strong commitments for ourselves in the coming year is that what does that look like? What do we let go of? What do we have to sacrifice? How do we grow? And you know, at the end of the year, you know, in Western society, you know, at the end of the line is the end, and there's nothing about it. But as we know, this year is the calendar is a circle, and like every ending, there is a new beginning. So the winter, the winter solstice, the end of the year, doesn't mean, you know, the year's over. It means more than that. It doesn't mean death. It means rebirth. So I think it's good for us to look at things this way, especially if we're trying to grow and move forward and better ourselves, better our lives, and do different things to improve in our day-to-day lives and our living conditions.
I really like that because we often hear about how people go through a lot of depression during the holidays, and folks who are struggling with mental illness have a lot of, you know, issues with depression and anxiety during a time of the year when many people are trying to create an appearance that they're celebrating and everything's perfect and the perfect family and the perfect house and the Christmas lights and everything is kind of really overemphasized on appearance. And I think that it's so important during the solstice to really understand that, you know, as Indigenous people, those shorter days and longer nights meant that we had that extra time to kind of decompress, slow down, you know, cuddle up by the fire and kind of like take those moments to reflect that we might not have during busier times of the year. And I think that's a practice that we need to kind of reintroduce our community to take the pressure off of like, oh, I got to get gifts for all these people. Oh, I got to run around and go to all these parties. Oh, I got to do this. I got to do that because the holiday season's coming and we have to cook a big meal and all this busyness is the complete opposite of the intent of solstice, which is to dial it down, relax, calm down, and kind of not be doing that whole running around thing. So I really think we need to recenter that, refocus that, and help folks kind of like, you know, you don't need to do all that. You can just be with your friends and family, you know, in a way that is not so stressful and really take the time to reflect.
Thank you. I think in this capitalistic world, it's super easy to get caught up with the season's greetings, the holidays, having to buy everybody gifts, and that's such the easy way out. I think a question for folks that are listening is how many of y'all are actually taking your time to spend time with the family, to spend time with people, to make these connections. And I'll be critical of myself. I know I'm not as necessarily the best one when it comes to my family. But then, what's the gifts for? Is it all superficial, or can we do something that's more meaningful?
I would even take it one step further and say not just family, because for some folks, family can be very toxic and triggering, right? And a lot of times, especially we're talking about organizing, families aren't always on board with what we're doing in the organizing world and the changes we're trying to make. If you got a family full of Trumpsters, it might be better for you to stay home than try to deal with that shit, you know, like, so it's like, you know, I think I prefer to use the term like loved ones, because that could be your chosen family, that could be your friends, that could be your coworkers, that could be a lot of people might not necessarily be your family that you were born to. And so, but that's the point, is I really think folks should not feel guilty about not wanting to be in an environment where people are toxic and people are kind of caught up in that whole holiday fever. Right. It's okay to just stay home. It's okay to just be with the people that you love and not do all that. And I just want to put that message out there.
And again, just to repeat, chosen family is a thing, right? So before we get too far along talking about our chosen families, can we talk a little bit about what each of us do when it comes to organizing? And I'll start with you, Jason.
So let me first start with acknowledging that here at Chica, here in San Bernardino, is stolen indigenous land, specifically Yahaviatan, which is also known as the Serrano. That being said, San Bernardino, and the IE as a hood, the IE as a whole.
So let's talk about how you got started organizing, though. Like, how do you organize?
So the way that I started organizing was actually in high school. Growing up out in Fontana, growing up in the IE, I kind of grew up angry, pissed. As a Central American, I used to actually get into a lot of fights because I was Salvadorian. But as I started to read books and learn more and more about what was going on, my anger was, instead of, picking a fight or defending myself because somebody's coming at me a certain way, I started wanting to do something about what was going on, and actually helped started a Mecha chapter at my high school at Etijuana High, which was in Rancho Cucamonga, which, in hindsight, making a Mecha chapter in a very conservative district, not fun. But eventually I ended up meeting several people, Hector from the Brown Berets, and eventually Mary, who at that time, Chica was still, was barely being created around in the Occupy movement. And eventually after like maybe a couple months later, there's a space in Colton, and I started coming around, and from there on, I've never left. And Chica is my family. Chica is part of my extended family. So much love, so much passion, so many damn fights. But at the end of the day, like, these are the people that I love. These are my ride or die. This is my tribe.
Ooh.
Thank you. So, Mary, tell us how you got into organizing.
So I came out here to the Inland Empire about a little over 20 years ago, and I was going through a divorce. I had a small child. My daughter, Veronica, was only 2 years old when I moved out here. And I was basically restarting my life because I had been married. I had a whole nother plan about what was going to happen. I was a military wife, so my husband was in the Coast Guard. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Because my plan about what I was going to be doing was suddenly changed. And I moved out here because it was more affordable. So I went to school at San Bernardino Valley College. And that's where I started organizing. And I started organizing parents. I became the president of the parent club for the Child Development Center on campus. And I took my first child development class, and it was a parenting class. And there was an instructor who, gave me an A in the class, and some other folks who were brown and black had gotten Fs for doing the same amount of work. And something was wrong with this. There was no syllabus. There was like some issues. So I filed a grievance, even though I got an A, on behalf of like 2 or 3 sections of this parenting class.
Okay.
And I went in and spoke to the department chair. I had this like hearing kind of thing. And the department chair made them change the grades for all the students because it was really unfair. And her name was Julianne Martin. She was a really amazing woman who's taught at Valley for 38 years. And in the middle of this hearing process, she told me, "Do you have a job on campus?" And I was like, "No." She was like, "Do you want one?" And I was like, "Yes." I was like literally on welfare. I was, really struggling to feed and pay rent for my daughter and I. And she hired me. She hired me on the spot. And that's really unusual because usually administrators, department chairs, or deans would be looking at you kind of angry if you're filing a grievance against their department.
Right.
But she saw the quality of the work I put together, and she needed someone to help type course outlines. So I ended up doing that, and I ended up becoming a permanent classified staff. She allowed me to write a grant, and we wrote a grant from First Five, California, for a parent education center at Valley. And I worked for that grant for many years, educating and organizing parents, basically getting paid to organize parents and families. And from there, I went on to work for the foundation where I organize students around scholarships. I currently work in the library where I do a lot of organizing around equity and diversity issues. I've been in leadership for the union, leadership for the Latino faculty and staff. I've sat on statewide committees for legislative committees for the community college system. So I've just been organizing ever since. I've organized students, parents, community members, the raza, like just anybody. And I really feel like it's been a real blessing that I was able to do that at the community college level. I feel like the community colleges are like just so ripe and ready for students to be organized there, and nobody's really paying attention to that. You hear about organizing at Berkeley and UCLA, and nobody really pays attention to organizing at the community college level. And there's a ton of students that are just waiting to have those models of organizing, and we've had some of those great professors at Valley that really inspired me. Dr. Ed Milliken in the Poli-Sci department, Ed Gomez in the Chicano History department, and of course Julianne Martin as my boss. They all inspired me how to get involved and to kind of maneuver a system that brought me to creating the Chica space, which is a community space. It's the only service cooperative in the Inland Empire. And it's a whole new model about how organizing can happen for the community. And we're basically just making it up as we go along and trying to figure out how to duplicate some of the work that we've been doing so that other spaces could also offer safe spaces and community spaces in the Inland Empire. We have a very drastic lack of collectives, cooperatives, and just general safe spaces in the community. So that's brought me to that organizing, where I do that organizing now. And then I also do a lot of organizing around healing, specifically for women's circles, decolonizing indigenous women, and specifically like missing and murdered indigenous women who've been survivors of domestic violence, abuse, sexual assault, child abuse, molestation, all those types of things. So that's where I spend the majority of my energy now. And I'm just thrilled to be doing it. I feel blessed and lucky that the universe has given me a path where I'm able to do that work and get paid.
I'm all amen to that.
Amen.
So I guess I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then we'll shoot over to Asher so that we can figure out his story. But myself, I actually got started kind of the same way. About 20 or so years ago, I had been doing some work as a teen, doing pregnancy or teen pregnancy prevention work. And at the time, I really didn't have a concept of what organizing was. And I really didn't understand what organizing was until I met you, actually. So, yep, snaps for Mary. Because, at the base level, when I was a teenager, they literally just had us working in a teen center. We would go out and recruit teens and whatnot. And I really didn't understand at that time, like, how important the work was that we were doing. Because I thought, oh, we're just hanging out with kids. We're kids ourselves, but we're a little bit older. And it was just weird to be out there and just connecting with folks, not really understanding that the work we were doing is we were teaching kids about, birth control and saying that, it's a reality that as Black and brown youth, that we're going to be intimate with one another. And, instead of doing that traditional push of abstinence, it's all about being safer, if that makes sense. And if we can, let's provide you the tools and the things that you need to make sure that you are having safer sex. So from there, I ended up going to Valley College, and I was doing the newspaper, and then got dragged into student government. And that is where I met the Mary V. And literally, it was just a crash course in knowing that and knowing when to really make moves, because at the time we had a president who was not student friendly, and we had folks who were not really rooting for students and really didn't like seeing us in positions of power, because we had control of over $1 million, and they wanted that money, and they wanted to use that money the way they wanted, and they were hoping that they could wait us out. And so with working with Mary, learned different things, got involved on the state level, going to different conferences, lobbying with, Congress people and assembly members and whatnot. And then literally just have ended up doing that type of work my whole life. Now, I'm not at the same level that I was at that point because I haven't been doing as much work with assembly members and whatnot, but that's kind of where I'm headed again. And with doing the work in religious communities, that's been something that has been a little bit of a change because, you know, when you're working in a faith-based or going towards a faith-based type of organizing, sometimes people have a different feeling because they're afraid of being too radical. And they want to make sure that when we are approaching folks that we are specifically trying not to ruffle too many feathers. But what I've learned is many times when you are doing organizing, you have to ruffle a few feathers.
That's kind of the point, yeah.
Right? It's like you have to not be what is always traditional. You have to be able to give folks an option and let them know, hey, here's another way. Let's do this together. Let's build this community.
Educate, educate, and organize.
Boom.
Agitate, yeah.
But that's my story. So, Asher, what's your story?
Like you said, it's kind of like I think for a lot of us, we don't take the traditional route, and I think that's where we find ourselves. And I think that some of us are kind of like the black sheep in our families, and so we're out there looking for community. We're out there looking for people who are ourselves, and so sometimes that's how we kind of fall into organizing.
It could be the rainbow sheep, or the brown sheep, or the red sheep.
Or
just not the white sheep.
Yep. I was the rainbow sheep for a while.
I get that sheep.
I'm pretty sure I was a coyote, not the sheep.
So I went to RCC, and I started in student government, and I was in clubs and organizations. I went to board of trustee meetings. I went to academic senate meetings, and myself, I was actually a senator. So in Senate, I actually advocated for more queer inclusion, resources, visibility, and things like that. So before I was even a senator, there was a name and pronoun policy that they were talking about, and I helped facilitate that and educate the senators about what that was. And then after that, I got confirmed as a senator. So I was doing that work before then. And so really, the culmination of my work at RCC really did transfer out into what I did in the community.
I'd like us to go to talking about decolonizing organizing, if we can start there.
Yay! Right up my alley.
Because I think that's a good place to start, because I think all of our other topics kind of lead into that. So if we can, Mary, if you'd like to start us off.
Yeah, I just really want to, I think we need to start with dismantling how people have thought about organizing in the past. Like, I think a lot of folks think you have to have the title community organizer. My official title at Valley College is secretary, and it's always been secretary. But I'm still able to organize, whether I'm organizing teachers, organizing parents, organizing community members, organizing youth. It's always, a part of my job, because I work in an institution that has access to frontline community, So I really think we got to start with dismantling the idea that it has to be your title in order for you to be a community organizer. And then secondly, as you hear all the stories right now, you see that a lot of us got into organizing as students, as youth, whether that was high school or college. It was kind of opened the door to organizing. And typically, stereotypically, what happens is, folks organize as students, and then they grow up, graduate, get a career, and they never organize again, And so really dismantling the idea that organizing is a temporary thing that you do as an internship while you're a student, or as a club project, as a volunteer, dismantling that and really instituting something about lifelong organizers and people, that we're building the skills to be lifelong organizers. And whether your title is a teacher or a janitor or a police officer or a doctor or a minister or whatever your title is, that you can and should be doing community organizing as a part of that job. And that if we all did that, the community would be stronger for it. The issues that we face would be minimized, and that we could start looking at the intersection of all those jobs instead of being in silos. We could work more in unity together to help decolonize the entire system. And I think that's the ultimate goal. So, lifelong organizers, not just organizing as your job title, but everyone being an organizer. And then getting back to being grassroots and community-based. So moving away from the 501c3 as the only organizations that can do organizing, and understanding that we need collectives, we need cooperatives, we need innovators, we need people who will do community organizing, paid, unpaid, barter, sweat equity, all these different methods of allowing folks to come together and share resources for the betterment of the community is a win-win-win for all of us. The only person that it's a lose for is what we call #same villains, right? The same people who have a stake in us not organizing, which is corporations, big banks, developers, big oil, and corrupt politicians.
And I was going to say, if I can add on that real quick, that I think that the heart of organizing is really about community building. It's not that you're going out really for one specific thing. It's really the work that we're doing, or the work that organizers do, is build community. Is build community first, and then from there, everything else happens.
Absolutely. Like that one issue organizing is a thing of the past, right?
Yep.
Like you can't come in here and just say, I'm only going to work on environmental justice.
Right.
You have to come in here with a more intersectional approach about community-based building, and not just be this one issue wonder, and gone are those days. And if folks are stuck in those days, we're going to see them become extinct, like the dinosaurs.
Yeah, no, and for me, I've been doing a lot of this organizing for about 6 years. I think one thing I've learned, especially from the big nonprofits or the 501c3s, is how institutionalized and how set on ideas on white supremacy, patriarchy, et cetera, are still ingrained even in the most progressive of organizations, especially in places where old white men are still very dominant in the conversations, while black and brown youth are in the front lines, putting their lives in the line. But yet at the end of the day, we still don't, we still have to deal with the BS that we see in the big nonprofits, and I think in the piece of decolonizing is every day we take a step away from the colonizer's perspective, even within these progressive nonprofits, these NGOs, and I think it all starts. I think in decolonizing community, it all starts with yourself. You can talk about this and this is going on, and this is what's happening to our people. But then at the end of the day, what are you going to do about that? What are you doing? And not just to change the system, but change ourselves, because we have to acknowledge that we have suffered from trauma due to whatever issues we've dealt with in our life, whether it's, PTSD growing up in the hood, or anxiety and depression for living in an abusive household, or whatever. And I think in decolonizing, we have to look at ourselves and say that we need to better ourselves, and we need to heal from some of these traumas. How are we gonna push for change if we ourselves are not pushing pushing ourselves to that change? We're talking about decolonizing. What do we do to retake back our roots, to look back at indigenous practices in order for us to heal and to have a better spirit to fight? And I think this work is hard. It is draining, and it is sometimes damaging, and it sometimes takes away from our spirits. And that's why we have to look at these talking circles, these healing circles, ceremony, community, family, friends, love, and just being there for one another so that we can keep our sanity. Decolonizing is not just reclaiming yourself as indigenous and saying, yeah, screw you, colonizer. It's about, the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into the community in order for things to get better. And like I said, at the end of the day, it starts with you. It starts with yourself.
I do want to add on there real quick that when you were looking at the idea of decolonizing, and we're talking about 501c3s, I do want to put out there that not all 501c3s are bad, because I have to. For legal. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Sure.
But I do want to say that I think that, as you were saying, like at the end of the day, a lot of it is revolving around capitalism. Mm-hmm. And it's because money is a thing. And whether we like it or not, money plays a large role in a lot of our organizations. But I think the way to kind of like address that is what Mary was talking about, and is acknowledging that there are other models of organizations like co-ops that really are more community focused.
They distribute the power,
yes.
Right? The problem with the 501c3 is not that it's a 501c3, it's the problem of the CEO, the CFO, the board, like this hierarchy structure that is built into, for you to even become a 501c3, you have to have that. There's no option for you to be something else, and that's very limiting. It's limiting, and it creates an imbalance of power. We know some 501c3s or people who are using 501c3 numbers from other orgs that are doing atrocious things to the community. Like we know one in particular that used to be affiliated with the old Chica building that was supposed to be feeding the community, but they were charging people for the food that they were giving to the community. Or, if there's shared resources among multiple community organizations, they want all the resources for themselves. They want the building, they want this, they want that, and will go through very, extreme measures to try to take resources from other organizations. Very territorial, very predatory, very I'm going to get mine type mentality. And so, like everything else, we have to protect our community from those types of 501c3 orgs. And then for every org that's like that, we know of another org that's doing the grassroots work in an amazing way. Some of the immigrant justice organizations, some of the organizations dealing with domestic violence, like some of the organizations that are legitly feeding and clothing, homeless folks without asking for a big salary or money or pocketing things on the side, and I think that's the real danger, is those people that would take advantage, those wolves in sheep clothing, like that we have to be aware that they exist. And as a community, we have to make sure that we don't become that. I think it's so easy to start off with the right intentions as a 501c3 and to slowly, because you're trying to chase grants, because you're trying to, have certain policies and procedures, you change, And that's what I see with some of these big NGOs where they say they want to do equity work and inclusion work. They say they want to be inclusive of LGBTQ folks and undocumented, but in practice, they do things that harm these communities over and over again, or they bring in resources and then pull them away, like pulling the rug out from the community. And we have experienced that directly ourselves here at Chica. So now we know better. Now we know we can't just trust any person who comes in here and says they want to feed the community. Now we know we can't just trust any person who says they want to be in here and rent space. We have to have a process to vet and make sure that they're going to be able to be held accountable when they don't do the right thing by the community. And
before you speak, I know Asher had something, but and maybe Asher, I can throw this at you. So a couple times tonight we've said mentioned NGO. Will you explain what an NGO is and then go into your comment?
So there's two interpretations of an NGO: non-governmental agency, and some people also say National Green Organization, which implies the big environmental justice organizations. So depending on the context, A non-governmental organization is like a 501c3 that's not affiliated with the government. So not the Department of Ed, the Department of Labor, the Department of Agriculture, the Forestry Service, like all those kind of government agencies are also nonprofits, but they're lumped into a specific category because they're related to the government. So they're part of the system. And they also, you know, their scope is limited by either the state legislature or the federal government. And then the other NGO is what's also referred to as the big greens, which are the big nonprofit organizations that are claiming to be green organizations, but often are so huge. I believe there's 5 major NGOs that are just so huge that they actually do a lot of crazy practices that are not good for the environment. So, for example, we know an NGO where we were having an event in the Palm Desert area, and they're based out of Los Angeles. And, they decided to fly their organizer from Los Angeles to Palm Desert, instead of drive the 2-hour drive, they flew. And, to us, it's like, how can you be an environmental justice organization and, fly yourself somewhere that you could easily drive to? It might be a 2 or 3 hour drive, but that's a way better option than flying in terms of the environment. But they're such a huge organization that they don't see that, and they're not responsive to the community in that way. So when we pointed that out, they were very like, okay, yeah, we can kind of see it, but it's still a practice that's going on, all the time. So I think the whole point about NGOs is, if we're trying to dismantle the system, of course we know that the government organizations are going to have a certain thing where they're going to protect the system. But NGOs also protect the system, right? They're affiliated as a 501c3 under a system that they are then, they have to answer to. So they can only go so far in their progressive agenda, because ultimately, if they do something that's against, the grain, they take the risk of losing their 501c3 status. And that's the thing that collectives and cooperatives are kind of protected from, is that we don't have that affiliation with some kind of government agency or non-government agency, that we can be a little more autonomous and push for, either system change or system dismantling completely. Right?
And I think that's the piece of decolonizing our organizing, is looking at alternative models of organizing, or just a different approach in different ways that is more rooted in grassroots community. One of my biggest influences, and I think really big influence to Chica, is the EZLN, the Zapatistas. And they have something called the 7 principles of Zapatismo. And if I could just name this out, throw and let that be known, I'll let it be known. The 7 principles are to obedecer y no mandar, to obey and not command, to proponer y no imponer, to propose and not impose, representar y no suplantar, to represent and not supplant, convencir y no vencir, to convince and not conquer, construir y no destruir, to construct and not destroy, servir y no servirse, to serve others and not serve oneself, bajar y no subir, to work from below and not seek to rise.
Yeah.
So when Mary's talking about 501c3, and we're talking about accessibility and movement, and so 501c3s can only go so far because they're beholden to stakeholders. Those stakeholders demand reports, briefings, things like that, saying exactly what you're doing, when you're doing them, how many people doing them. So really, in the end, people become deliverables, and they become dehumanized because you're just another number to them. And I felt that many times as a trans person in some spaces where I've been a part of a 501c3, and it's very tokenizing, and it boggles the mind how they would say they're inclusive. Also, healing is a really big part of what we do here at Chica. And so that's something that 501c3s may not understand or know intensively if they're using people as deliverables, if they're dehumanizing them and using them as numbers, and things like that. And so I just really want to put that out there, because if you don't do the healing work, then you can't do the organizing work. And if you can't do the organizing work, you can't do the healing work. And so really, are you really an organizer at that point? Or are you just a cog in the machine? Or are you part of that machine? Like Mary was saying, like a 501c3.
Right on, Asher, right on. So like there's like specific organizing models, right? And I think what you're referring to is like some of our organizing is based off the organizing that was done by Cesar Chavez, right? Which has a very specific model that includes like this one-on-one process where you build relationships with people, and that you're vulnerable as an organizer, and that it's reciprocal, and all this stuff is happening before the ask, right? When you walk in the door and organizations shove a paper in your face and ask you to do an intake form, or ask you to do, and they haven't even built that relationship with you, that's like exactly what you're talking about. The dehumanizing of the community, and also the tokenizing, and the tokenizing is really important. Because right now there's all types of funding for certain equity issues and things like that, and it's all supposed to come from like really good places, but it ends up being very tokenizing. How many LGBTQ people do you have? How many undocumented people do you have? How many Black folks do you have? Check all these boxes, right? And at the end of the day, if those relationships haven't been built, if there isn't a steady communication happening where you're actually getting to know people on a personal level, where they feel comfortable telling you what's going on with their families, where they share with you when they need help, and also come and give help when other community members need it. If there's not that reciprocity happening, then you're not relationship building. You're just pushing papers around, and you're just getting paid to get deliverables, and that is not community organizing.
At the end of the day, for me personally, like some of my best and closest friends came through the organizing, and that was part of the relationship building. That was part of what it means to really build community, because at the end, we start to realize is that all we got is ourselves, and us trying to surround ourselves by other like-minded individuals, and trying to, some of us end up just becoming extremely close, And that's here at Chica, and with other groups that also have very similar models, and it ends up just being another job. And ain't nobody that close with their coworkers like that. I mean, if you are, cool for you too. But.
And it's ultimately a corporation, right? Like 501c3s are incorporated. It is a corporation. And so, like, I think it's real important for people to remember that and understand and analyze, reflect on their work, and how much is it a corporation and how much is it community based, because we have also lost good people and seen good people get swallowed up by nonprofit industrial complex and corporate mentality, suit and tie executive mentality, and even in the best, most progressive orgs, they can get sucked up into that, and then we never see them again. Not on the front line anyways.
Just to add to that, here at Chica, we have like something called sweat equity. So you put in time, work, actual sweat into the space, and in return you're allowed to have certain, I want to say privileges, but I don't know if I would call them that.
Access to resources. Access
to resources and things like that. And so that comes along with the relationship building and things like that, and those one-on-ones, and saying that you want to be here, this is who I am, saying your story, being vulnerable and things like that, coming to things like Healing Circle, and showing up when you need to. And it's not just when there are events happening or when there's something fun happening. It's also when, the nitty-gritty is happening. You have to move boxes, you have to move furniture and things like that. The stuff that people really want to do.
Clean the bathrooms.
I agree with that. I see Jason, Mary, and Matt as my family. I've called Jason my brother for the longest time. And that's something that comes with those one-on-ones. That's something that 501c3s, people in 501c3s might not understand, acknowledge, or know, or want to know about. But those are the building blocks of what we have. Not only here in Chica, but really community co-ops, service co-ops, and things like that, where we actually care about people, who they are, We go to their houses. We care for their family. We go, we take care of each other. Unfortunately, some people need that because they've never had it. But when they are able to come to spaces like this, it is fortunate because they are able to receive what they need as people, so they can give back if they can when they're able to.
Word. Thank you for sharing that. I think it would be cool if we can kind of talk about our recent projects and the things that we have coming up, because it's almost that time.
Okay.
So if we can, I guess I'll start with you, Mary, and we'll work our way back around.
Sure. Just kind of reflecting on the past Chica work, we've been through a lot of ups and downs. This is our second building. We had another building in Colton. We were there for several years, and then we decided to do an experiment and see if we didn't have a building for a while, would we still have a community? Would we still be organizing? And we did. We kind of passed that test. And so now we've been into this new building for about 6 months. We've got about half of the building kind of set, the Chica side of the building, and then we have another side of the building that we're working on in the next 6 months, which is going to be open to the community. And so we see a lot of visioning going on there. We're working on some visioning now to kind of reset what that looks like to the community. And I see some big things in our future. We've been working in different capacities, and we've been very blessed to be involved in some decision-making bodies where we've been able to influence some of the decisions and some of the resources that are coming to the community. So we're excited to do some work around possibly purchasing and restoring and conserving some indigenous land in the region. And more importantly, making sure that there's community access to that land and that it's done in a very decolonized, appropriate, respectful way, acknowledging the indigenous land that we're on and who was here before us. So we're super excited to be involved in that work, working with land conservancies and other bodies to try to protect some of the resources that we think have been slowly taken away from many of our community members. And we're also pursuing some projects where we're going to try to help get low-cost internet into the homes of all of our community members. We think like that is a huge access issue. When we talk about community access, homes that don't have internet is a huge issue for students. It's a huge issue for youth. It's a huge issue for elders, folks who have mobility issues. And anything we can do to make sure that everybody in our community has internet is something that we're going to be really working on. And also that they're empowered with their technology. So doing workshops around how to move away from Microsoft Office and Windows and go to Linux and Python and other open source software, how to code, how to know more about your computer so that if it breaks or has a virus, you're able to take care of it yourself. And that's a program we call the Hack Lab, and we're super excited to see the Hack Lab growing and growing here at Chica.
And Asher, how about yourself? Any projects that you're working on right now?
A support group for parents who have transgender children called the Rainbow Village. It means every fourth Saturday from about 3 to 5, we have space for children to work on crafts on one side of the building, one side of the room, and on the other side of the room we have our parents talking about their difficulties or struggles with academia and just having their child maneuver through binary systems in school. And we also have workshops on getting to understand a little bit about what being trans is, what are some terms that are in queer community, and what can be done to make a more inclusive school or space for your child. And just in general support. It's also about healing. So again, without the healing, you can't do the work. Without the work, you can't do the healing. And it's a really beautiful space. So it's called Rainbow Village again. And you can look them up on Facebook.
And Jason, how about yourself? What kind of projects are you working on right now?
So here at Chica, for folks that don't know, and y'all probably hear it all the time if y'all follow our Instagram or our podcast, we do circles. Circles are a big part of what we do. We have the Uni Circle, which is the first Sunday of every month at 5 p.m. So anybody and everybody, y'all are welcome. It's a place for healing, to be able to communicate and talk about some of our issues and our traumas, or just how we've been, and honestly, most importantly, to listen to each other's stories.
I'm doing the work with the Open Circle, which we meet the first Fridays of the month. And when it comes to like my ministry and the stuff that I'm doing with the UU Church of Riverside, in the upcoming year, we're going to be refocusing and really doing some more community building. This last year and the year before, we've done a lot of work and we've made a lot of change, but the work's not done yet, as others have said already. You know, when we're organizing, we really got to do what we got to do to make sure that we make change. And that's pretty much what we got going on. And last but not least, just a quick reminder, this Sunday at the UU Church of Riverside, I am preaching. We are doing a Yule ritual there. The nahuatlcircle is on the 29th of this month. So it's on December 29th, which is not this coming Saturday, but the next Saturday. It has been a wonderful episode talking to all of you folks. You all bring me so much joy, and to know that there are people that are out in the world caring about community, building community, so we can change community. Until we meet again, this has been an episode of Opportunity Knocks, and we'll see y'all next time.
See you next year.
Bye.
See you next year.
Peace out.